Okay, our next company is Orca Gold, and we're going to be hearing from their CEO, Richard Clark. Orca is a Canadian public company engaged in the acquisition and exploration of mineral properties in North and West Africa. Orca's principal asset is Block 14, the Block 14 Gold Project, and it's located in northern Sudan, where Richard Cariso, our reporter there, had the opportunity to go visit a few months back. So, Richard, please come up and take the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank, obviously, the Northern Miner and the Government of Canada for hosting this event. It works extremely well for us because about a year ago, management of Orca decided to become based in the UK. And so I live down the street, so this works out really well. I'm going to be a little bit different in terms of the presentation today and not talk a lot about the details of the project themselves. It's sort of apropos that we're having this event here in Canada House with part of the government of Canada, because the story that is developed with Orca, particularly in regards to Sudan, is one of political perception. And that's the case in any country you go into. What is the jurisdiction like? What are the politics like? What are the people like? And that's the real issue that we have with Sudan, not the project. The project's turned out to be amazing, and I'll explain as we go through. So we founded Orca about 6 years ago and went into Sudan. And when we got there, we actually started looking at base metals, and we made a discovery near the border with Eritrea. And it's what geologists called a technical success. In other words, it wasn't economic. But it got us into Sudan, and based in Khartoum, the capital city, and we heard about a very huge gold rush that was going on in the north. And so we sent some of our people up to the north and discovered that there were literally tens of thousands of Sudanese mining gold, and that started in earnest about 6 years ago. And so we were very lucky to get onto a concession, Block 14, and do a deal with the local owner, and we've been working hard on that ever since. And as I'll go through and explain to you, we've had a lot of success. Just a quick background on the company itself. This was a company that was originally started as a private venture by Lucas Lundin and myself. And when we got to Sudan and we realized we were going to focus on gold, we then brought in the ex-Redback management team that had worked with me for many years. And we went out and talked to some of our friends. And as we sit here today, the largest shareholder of Orca is Lucas, and the second largest shareholder is my dear friend Ross Beatty, who everybody knows. And the management board also has a significant position. And so really between the three of us, we control almost half the company. So it makes it extremely easy to deal with your shareholders. It also makes it extremely easy to deal with the market in general. So who are we? I ran Redback for 10 years. Hugh Stewart, who's the president, was head of exploration for Redback. Kevin Ross was the chief operating officer of Redback, and Jeff Yip was a junior accountant at Redback. The board, Simon Jackson's chairman, he was my number 2 guy at Redback, and the other board members had some connection. 2 recent board members, David Field, ex-Carmagnac, and Derek White, who has been presenting here as well. So where are we? We're very far up in the north of Sudan, right on the Egyptian border. The closest project in production to us is Centamin Sukari project, about 600 kilometers to the north. And as I said, when we got there, the place was screaming with artisanal miners. And in our concession alone, there was somewhere between 10 and 15,000 artisanal miners on Block 14. Now, that may sound a little bit daunting, and for those of you who have operated in other parts of the world, say in South America or West Africa, artisanal mining or garimperos are a major problem, and nowadays everybody asks about that. For us, it was completely the opposite. The artisanal miners, you have to understand something about Sudan. There is no geological database for the country. There's been hardly any geology done in Sudan, other than very, very wide macro, large-scale mapping. So when you go into Sudan as an explorer, and this is, argue that the best in the world are the Canadians and the Australians for this. And we go in and we look at something and we look at the ground and go, where did we begin? And I think you roll up your sleeves and you dig in and you create your own database. And that's what's going on in Sudan. So unlike most other places where our colleagues operate, there's nothing here. These properties have never been looked at before. We're the first ones that drilled them. And so you're going to have some successes and you're going to have some failures. But lucky enough, how we reduced our odds in that regard is we followed all the artisanal miners. So we can't claim any genius here, really. What we've done is basically looked at every little operation that the artisanals had on our property, and we focused on what we were looking for, which was great, big, huge alteration zones. And the first one we discovered that artisanals were on ended up being our discovery that we've now taken into a revised PEA, and soon we will announce a feasibility study on. So just to summarize the artisanal situation, in 5 to 6 years, Sudan has gone from a relatively minor gold producer in Africa to the second largest gold producer in Africa, and there is no commercial mines. It is all from artisanal mining, and there's about 1.5 million of them throughout the country mining gold. And last year, under the government's figures, they produced something like 100 tons of gold by artisanal mining. The key to this, as I said, this is just to highlight some of the other operations in the area and the Nubian Shield. Most of the operations are in Saudi Arabia. The ones that everybody know, or most people know about in Sudan and Eritrea, would be the Hassai project that was owned by La Mancha, and also Bisha, which was Nefsun down in Eritrea, and then to the north, Sakari, owned by Sentiment. So that's it for one of the best geological belts in the world to date. Today our concession is 2,100 square kilometers. It started off at 7,000. And believe me, as I said, you sit back and you go, how the heck are we going to assess this? And it's just a question of getting the right people jumping in and digging hard. So we ended up finding 2 deposits, the main one which we call GSS, which is in the center of the screen, and then off to your right is Wadi Doom. The key to these projects in the desert is you have to have water. Without water, mines don't work. And so when we realized we were onto something, then we had to go and find water, and it was quite a process because, again, no exploration. And if we had more time, I could go into the history of water in this part of the world. But suffice it to say, at the end of the day, we discovered water where the British discovered water back when Kitchener was going down to take back Khartoum from the Mahdi after he had killed General Gordon. And they drove the railway down from Egypt, and they stopped in the middle of the desert and said, we cannot go any farther unless we find water. And the British engineers went out with divining rods, and they dug a well, and that they called Station 8, and that is still there today, and it's the only well. The aquifer we discovered, which is huge, is just slightly north of Station 8. So even with all our technology, at the end of the day, the water was first discovered by diviners. So that just gives you an idea of the size and what makes this project economic. Today, the feasibility study for GSS and Wadi Doom is contemplating a throughput of 6 million tons. That is made possible because of the amount of the water we have discovered. And critically, and people asked me last year, what keeps you awake at night now with Sudan? I can tell you it isn't many of the issues other people would have. For me, it was, can we secure and show the world that we can get legal title to water? And we applied for our water rights in December, and the government of Sudan issued them by the end of January. It took 6 weeks. So today, in the last numbers we've put out, we have a measured and indicated and inferred resource of just about 4 million ounces. And as I said, that came from nothing, starting at nothing. At the moment, in terms of the feasibility work we're looking at, it's about 2.5 million ounces under the feasibility study mineable. And we're in the process of drilling now, and we're looking to make that higher. And our objective is to get up to 3 million ounces before we actually put out the study. I'm not going to go through a lot of geology, as I said. I'm just going to show you what's going on at the moment. And this is a section through the main pit at GSS. And there's been a lot of drilling. It's a complex ore body. It's very structurally controlled and folded. And we've been getting our heads around that for a few years and had pretty much of an epiphany at the end of last year, which caused us to change the azimuth of the drilling by about 90 degrees. And since then, we've had a major success rate in actually filling in the blanks of the block model in the optimized pit shells. So what I'm doing with this slide here is showing you on the sections what they've done is those intercepts are in blocks that were not measured or indicated before. They were actually waste or low-grade material. By changing the orientation, we've got a better understanding of the mineralization, and we're adding ounces very, very quickly to this model now. As also understanding the geology, we've made new discoveries in new zones, the latest being what we call the hanging wall zone. And as of this slide, we have 2 holes in it, and we'll be releasing more holes shortly on the hanging wall zone. So exploration is going extremely well, resource addition is going extremely well, and the feasibility study is almost completed. So this takes us to Wadi Doum. Wadi Doum is an interesting deposit. It's going to be drilled again in the next 2 weeks. It hasn't been drilled in a few years. It's high grade, it's almost 3 grams, and the material is going to be trucked to the main plant facility at GSS, and we will mine this one very quickly in the first 3 years of the mine life, and it makes a big difference in payback for the project. As I said, it's very high grade, and we are looking to add about 100,000 more ounces from the drill program we're doing this year or in the next month or so. And at the same time, we're going to be testing the underground potential of some very, very high-grade chutes that exist within this pit. In terms of other targets on the concession, as I said, it's 2,100 square kilometers. We have identified lots of other artisanal workings, lots of other targets. We've sampled some of them. We just haven't had the time to go back and focus on them because we've been concentrating on delivering an engineering study to show the world that we actually have a significant project here in the country of Sudan. So now as we're getting close to completion of the study, going forwards this year, we're going to be looking at about 10 other targets that we know of on the project, which we'd be looking to add in a later date to the whole concept of the economics of the plant we're going to build. So very excited about the geology. As I said, it's been a lot of work. We've had a lot of success, and we're looking to have a lot more success on this. Timeline, we are now in the process of considering, as I sort of foreshadowed, delaying the delivery of the study. It was going to be next month. We're probably going to delay it to about October, mainly because of the success of the drill program that's going on right now. In terms of permitting, we'll deliver the study towards the end of the year, and we expect within 2 to 3 months to have all the permits on the project, and we'll then proceed right forward towards development. And it's going to be about a 2-year build. Okay, just before going on to our other project in Côte d'Ivoire, as I said at the outset, Sudan is an amazing endowment for gold and all sorts of other minerals, but it's been a pariah state for almost 20 years. So the real problem has been economic sanctions that existed on the country, predominantly from the United States. A lot of other countries had sanctions, including Canada, but Canada's sanctions were limited to military interaction between Canadians and Sudan. So as a Canadian company, Orca was able to go there on a commercial basis. American companies, any American interest couldn't have anything to do with Sudan. And that effectively crippled Sudan in the long run. I mean, it's an example. You could argue that economic sanctions by the United States were successful in Sudan, but it took them 20-some-odd years. But what that culminated in is Sudan splitting into South Sudan and North Sudan, and we're in North Sudan, and it's predominantly Muslim. It's Arab. It is a merchant commercial culture. The people are very moderate. The people are politically and religiously tolerant, and they respect authority. So I think when all the people that have now come to Sudan and come to our project are amazed, we have no security. We have a 100-man camp. We haven't had security. You never see guns. You walk around Khartoum very safely. Western women walk in Khartoum without head coverings. You can wear jewelry, makeup. There's a Christian church right down the road from our office. It's an amazing place. The problem with the sanctions is it created a perception that Sudan was a horrible place. The people were horrible. They were militaristic. They were violent, human rights violations every minute of the day. Completely untrue. So, when we go and look at places to go and invest in the world, we don't take personal security risk. We're not going to do that to our people. but we are going to make our own assessment of political risk. And that's what we've done, and that's why our group has been pretty successful. So Sudan, very rapidly changing. The sanctions were effectively removed in October of last year. The last threshold for Sudan investment, the Americans still kept them on the list of state-sponsored terrorists. That is a big lobby that's going on that we expect they'll be off that list within the next 6 months, and coinciding with the renegotiation and settlement of their external debt. So the World Bank's going to come back in. We're going to see Sudan emerge onto the world stage from an economic perspective, potentially in a position within a couple of years to issue their own bonds, and away they go and their economy takes off. So it really is an amazing time to be investing in Sudan. And to give you sort of an indication of the interest that's getting, we were just at Sudan's 3rd annual mining symposium in Khartoum about 3 weeks ago. We were at the first 2. And the first 2, you could have played a baseball game in the stadium and not hit anybody. There was nobody there. This year there was 1,000 people, and almost every gold mining company in Africa was represented. So it is changing dramatically, and we're getting lots of neighbors, and the more the merrier for us there. So finally, and I'm probably running over, but we have also gone into Côte d'Ivoire, and last year we negotiated with Kinross to reacquire Redback's assets in Côte d'Ivoire. We discovered them, we did the work on them. They weren't core to Kinross, and we were able to do a deal with Kinross whereby Kinross took some shares in Orca and retained a royalty on this, and away we go. So we've got a pretty interesting land position. Most of these properties were staked back in 2009, 2008, and have virtually little work done on them. We've only focused on the one in the middle to this point, the Morondo permit. We've made a discovery, approximately 1.5 million ounces of a gram. We're doing metallurgical work on it. Our initial results are very positive, and so we're drilling as we speak on this one to see how big this resource is. It's a very simple project. Mineralization starts at surface. The strip is about 0.5 to 1, so it's going to be an easy project to mine, and we should have a pretty good idea of where this sits in our portfolio and potential within the next 3 to 4 months. So that's the story of Orca. We've sort of kept our head down, worked hard, developed the projects in Sudan, added the portfolio in Côte d'Ivoire, and we've got some recognition, but it really now is a question of people getting their heads around Sudan and where that goes, and I think that's going to be helped when we start seeing more announcements of other mining companies coming into the country. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. We do have time for a question. Yep. At the back there? Sure.
Hi there. I just wonder, can you give us a bit of insight into the code, the mining code in Sudan, royalty regimes, length of tenure, etc., please?
It's a bit of an evolving process. So the concessions that we have are historical concessions. They're older ones. They were based on oil and gas business. So our original concession was 7,000 square kilometers. Today, Sudan is issuing concessions and they're 300 square kilometers. The laws, and you got to understand, Sudan was based on a British system that has, it now has a Sharia law component, but the main structure is common law and Commonwealth. The law of the contract, there's international arbitration. It's obviously Sudanese law, but again, with a big British component. The contract, interestingly enough, is in English. The governing language of the contract is English. There's an Arab rider, but if there's any dispute, the English governs. So the concepts for ownership or title are very similar to a lot of other jurisdictions. And in this case, you've got the rights to explore, you've got to shed over a period of time, you've got to file exploration programs. And at the end of the day, if you find something, you convert it to a mining lease, just like you would in Canada or other places. And the government takes, depending upon the contract you have with them, anywhere from a 20 to a 30% carried interest in the company that holds the mining leases. But the carried interest is when we get to get our money back before we pay out dividends. So it's not a absolute free carry. The royalty, there's a 7% gold royalty, and I've learned in my experience in Africa, do not touch the NSRs, because that's instant cash to the government. they're prepared to maneuver a little bit on tax, on other financial terms, soft items. But the moment you go in and talk about royalties, your life gets extremely difficult. So we've left that alone, and we've been able to massage other aspects of it. But the tax regime is 15% corporate tax. So when you balance it all together, Sudan's about in the middle. But the interesting thing is title is good, and there's a lot of different legislation around that, whether it's a Water Act, a Financing Act, an Investment Act, etc. So I was pleasantly surprised, and I used to do this. I was a mining lawyer before I started running companies, so the first thing I go into these places is look at, can we actually operate under this law?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one last one, then we have to move on. Yeah.
You're dealing with artisanal mining, you mentioned. How are you dealing with them? Do you involve them in your mining process in a way that you buy their proceeds?
That's a good question. Look, the artisanals are illegal. However, the government has allowed them to be there because that's been where they've been making their revenue. We have worked side by side with the artisanals, always on the understanding when it was time for them to move, they would move. Okay? In many other jurisdictions, that ends up being a very violent process and difficult. It's not something we're going to put out a big news release on, but over the last 2 weeks, all the artisanals were moved off of what is going to be our mining leases. There was no violence. They went peacefully. It was orchestrated by the government. And we took all their names, and when it comes time to going out with jobs and contracts, when we actually start getting into production, we have the names of all the people that were working on the areas that we moved them from.